I'm 81 years old now, and I don't have much patience left for pretending I understand the world the way young people do. My hands shake when I hold a cup of tea. My memory skips sometimes. But there are a few things I've watched closely for decades, and one of them is how people fall, and what they do after. I'm not telling this story to defend anyone. I'm not telling it to impress you. I'm telling it because I've reached an age where the noise fades and patterns become clearer. And one pattern I can't ignore is how failure works differently on different people. I've buried friends who never recovered from one mistake. I've watched others survive 10 disasters and somehow keep going. Donald Trump was one of those people, not the version people argue about today. I mean the man I watched rise, collapse, get mocked, written off, and then somehow return again and again, when most men would have disappeared quietly. When I was younger, I thought success was a straight line. You work hard, you climb, you stabilize, and then you protect what you've built. That's how my life went. And that's also why my life feels smaller than I expected. Trump's life didn't move like that at all. When I was in my 30s, his name was already everywhere. Buildings, magazines, interviews. He looked untouchable, loud, confident, certain. The kind of man you assumed would never know fear. But then the cracks came. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, his businesses were drowning in debt. Casinos failing, deals collapsing, newspapers talking about bankruptcy like it was the end of him. Late-night jokes, industry people shaking their heads. I remember reading about it at my kitchen table before work. I folded the paper and thought, well, that's that. He flew too close. That's usually how it ends. Most people don't survive public failure, not because they can't rebuild financially, but because they can't carry the shame. I've seen it in men I knew personally. One bad business decision and they stopped attending family gatherings. One professional embarrassment and they shrank into themselves. They let one chapter define the rest of their life. Trump didn't do that. And this is where the truth gets uncomfortable. He didn't avoid failure. He walked straight through it, publicly, repeatedly, without apologizing for still existing. At the time, people called him reckless. They said he was finished. They said no serious person would work with him again. But while everyone was busy declaring him over, he was doing something I didn't understand until much later. He was separating his identity from his losses. Most of us tie our worth to our last result, our last paycheck, our last title, our last success. When that goes, we go with it. Trump didn't. He let the businesses fail, not himself. That distinction matters more than people admit. I didn't learn that lesson. When my own career stalled in my 40s, I took it personally. I became quieter, safer, more agreeable. I stopped risking embarrassment. I told myself I was being responsible. What I was really doing was protecting my pride. Trump didn't protect his pride. He protected his name. After the bankruptcies, he leaned into branding, licensing, media, visibility. He made himself unavoidable again. People laugh about that now, but at the time it was strategic. He understood something I didn't. Attention is a form of currency, and silence is a kind of death. I avoided attention when things went wrong. I waited for dignity to return. It never does. Trump let people talk. Let them criticize. Let them mock. And while they were doing that, he stayed in the room. That's where failure became his advantage. Because once you've failed publicly and survived, fear loses its power. You don't have to imagine humiliation anymore. You've already lived it. I think about that a lot now. How many decisions did I avoid because I didn't want to look foolish? How many conversations did I delay because I didn't want to be wrong? Failure teaches you where the floor really is. And once you've hit it and realized you're still breathing, the ceiling stops feeling so high. Trump failed loudly. And because of that, he learned something early that took me most of my life to understand. You don't get permission to continue. You just continue. By the time he appeared on television again years later, presenting himself as a decisive, successful figure, people criticized that too. They said it was fake, manufactured, but the truth is simpler. He learned how to tell his story instead of letting others tell it for him. I never did that. When my career slowed, I let silence speak for me. I let people assume I had peaked. I didn't correct them. Trump corrected everyone. Not gently, not politely, but effectively. I don't admire everything about the man. That's not the point of this story. What I recognize now, at the end of my life, is that failure didn't shrink him. It hardened him. It clarified him. And clarity is rare. Most people never recover from the first version of themselves that doesn't work. They cling to it, defend it, hide behind it. Trump abandoned versions of himself without mourning them. That's not something they teach you. We're told to be consistent, to protect our image, to avoid mistakes. No one tells you that adaptability is louder than perfection. The turning point for me came too late. I was in my 70s when a close friend died suddenly, a man who had spent his whole life being careful. No scandals, no risks, no dramatic failures. At his funeral, people spoke kindly, but vaguely. He was dependable. He was steady. He was a good man. No one talked about impact. No one talked about boldness. I went home and realized that would likely be said about me too. And that terrified me more than any failure ever could have. Trump, for all the controversy, would never be described vaguely. Love him or hate him, people speak specifically. Failure gave him that. It carved edges into him. What can't be fixed for me now is time. I don't get another decade to experiment. I don't get to reinvent myself loudly. I don't get to fail in public and recover. My remaining years are quiet ones. That's why I'm telling you this. Not because you should copy anyone. Not because wealth or fame is the point, but because failure is not the opposite of success. Avoidance is. Trump didn't win because he never failed. He lasted because he didn't disappear after failing. If you're young and listening to an old man like me, understand this. Most regrets don't come from what went wrong. They come from what you were too afraid to try again. If this meant something to you, sit with it for a while. You don't need to agree. You don't need to act today. Just don't assume you'll have endless chances to become braver later. I assumed that. And now, at 81, I know better.